in the pandemic, navigating the November general election. We are glad you could join us. I am Mary Hughes, co-president of the Lexington League. Jennifer Jackson is our other co-president. We have an exciting, informative program for you this evening that will help answer your questions about the November election. We have three outstanding speakers. Our first speaker is Fayette County Clerk, Mr. Don Blevins. He will outline the details of Fayette County's election procedures. Following Mr. Blevins' presentation, Professor Joshua Douglas will detail Kentucky's voter ID law enacted July 15th, 2020. Finally, we will hear from Selene Gomez, MPA. Ms. Gomez will tell us about VoteRiders services and outline how VoteRiders can help Kentucky voters. We will take questions at the end of our three presentations. Please type your questions in the chat box. We will monitor the questions and answer them at the end. I hope you enjoy our program. Is Don with us, Jen?
I just got here.
Great. Do you need a moment to catch your breath? Are you okay?
Figuratively, yes. But actually, no, I'm good.
Okay, let me start your introduction, Don, and then we'll be ready for you.
All right, yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, let's get our program started with Don Blevins, Fayette County Clerk. Mr. Blevins has an advanced degree in electrical engineering and has worked in software development for several companies before becoming the Fayette County Clerk in 2009. Okay, Don.
Thank you, Mary. I apologize for coming in late. Technology escapes even a master's degree in electrical engineering occasionally, and so I had to fumble around and find Jennifer's email and redo it. So I'm here though, here we go. So I'm sure everybody's burning to know exactly how all this is going to work. That would include me. Today, I have maybe kind of sort of commitments on our in-person voting that I'll describe here in a minute, but it's not final. So I'm sorry that I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen tonight, but I'll give you a general overview. So I'm sure most of you are informed, and you know that already the portal is open to request your ballot by mail. If you have a fear of COVID, then that's a qualifying reason to request a ballot by mail. Although it's been couched kind of politically and phrased carefully, the fact is mail-in voting is open to anyone that feels that they need it. We will also have in-person voting starting in October, on October the 13th, and then finally a quasi-normal election day voting as well in person. So all three of those options are available to voters. I've been talking about this socially as the smorgasbord of options because for most voting activists, I'm sure Mr. Douglas would agree with this, or Dr. Douglas, sorry, that this is like the grail from a voting point because it's everything you hope for. From a county clerk perspective, it's the holy oh no perspective because it's three simultaneous different kinds of elections. And we are so structurally not set up for this in Kentucky. So someday if we decide to modify how we're going to vote and it's going to include some of these options, I would advocate that we take a hard look at the structural way we're going to support doing elections because we're borrowing a local county official to do a job and expanding the job exponentially in real time. So all the counties are going to struggle with this time. I'll say this, the problem will scale with the county's size. Don't think that only the large counties are going to struggle. All of us will struggle, and it's because of the multitude of options. I personally support all the multitude of options. I think it's a great idea. On the other hand, it's extremely difficult with our limited staffs to pull this off. Most people think, well, what's the big deal? Go get you some election officers and get you some additional help. Well, the reason is it's not resources like money or people. It's resources that have the expertise to do this. The expertise requires that you know how to handle mailed-in ballots. The expertise requires that you know how to set up precincts that are compliant with federal and state law, as well as practically able to handle the volume of people we're going to see. and then the experience to know when they're going to show up and how they're going to do it. Well, I literally have 7 of those kind of people at my office, one of which retired at the end of July. How do you like that timing? So it's going to be a stretch even for me. I think we can pull this off. I don't want you all to be afraid, but I want you to know it has stretched every county clerk to the absolute max. We can't do this every time. It's too much. So we will do it. We will get through this together, as the governor likes to say. But I want you to know this is not the best of times for county clerks, even though it's the best of times potentially for voters. So let's go into why that is. The first thing is that you can vote by mail. In Fayette County, I'm going to push that hard, and we'll get to why in a minute, but the basic reason is that our in-person location status is very bad. We'll talk about why that is in a minute. So I'm going to push in Fayette for folks to vote in person. Statewide, however, you're going to see the State Board of Elections push early voting in person and have mail kind of as a backup. Hoping, by the way, that folks will kind of split between the two and alleviate some of the pressure on the smaller counties for mail-in voting versus in-person voting, and get a nicer blend where you have more in-person voting and less mail-in voting, therefore getting a blend that the county can handle. In Fayette, we're kind of the opposite of the rest of the state, and I'll explain why in a minute. So early mail-in voting is already available via the portal. It's govoteky.com. You can request your ballot today if you're ready to go. For those of you that are in advocacy roles, I would encourage you to first encourage people to check their registration. That's a key step. You can do it at the exact same website. You can do everything I'm about to say at the exact same website, govoteky.com. You can check your registration status. If you're good, you can go ahead and request your ballot. If you need to update your registration, you do it from the same site. Most people will need to update if they've moved recently or in the last year. Sometimes we forget to update our driver's license or update our voter registration address, or both. That's easy to do via the portal, and you have until October the 5th to complete that. After you check your registration status and everything is well, then you may request your ballot via the same site and go ahead and get that in the queue. In Fayette County, I believe today I saw we're up to 42,000 advanced requests already. You need to know that last Friday was the last day to file for president in the Commonwealth. And we got a filing. If you don't know, Kanye West decided to file in Kentucky, which changed all the ballots across the state, which means we couldn't print the ballots until this week sometime. My staff, we are one of the larger counties, so the printers pay more attention to me and less attention probably to the smaller counties. So I already have my ballot proofs, and we sent them back in today as good. So now the printer can actually start printing our ballots. But we probably won't receive enough ballots to start realistically mailing out ballot packages to the voters until early next week. So we are telling folks, don't expect your ballot at least until late September if you're one of the early requesters, and probably more likely the first week of October if you're just requesting like today, for example. So that gives you a synopsis of mail-in ballots. Let's talk about processing those ballots. I'm going to do the same thing in Fayette we did back in the primary. We'll do our processing out at our election warehouse, which is a highly secure facility with all kinds of protections. We're going to live stream that activity every day we do it. That makes us compliant with the open records and open meetings law. I'm hopeful that the campaigns will limit the number of observers because we don't have a lot of physical space for that, and resort to using the live stream. But we will have some availability for in-person observation of what we're doing. So that, I think, takes care of most of the mail-in ballot stuff. Let's talk about how you return your ballot. You can return your ballot via the U.S. mail, like we all could do. However, this time I'm going to expand the options for dropping off your ballot. I've ordered 6 secure ballot boxes that are heavy gauge steel that will be located throughout the city. I can't tell you tonight exactly where they're going to be because those plans are not finalized. But if you think Compass Points, possibly one downtown, you'll get the idea. But there will be a total of 6, not 1, 6. So I want that to get out there. That will alleviate some of the concerns that people have about returning their ballots via the U.S. Post Office. I think that's a valid concern, by the way. If enough of us will use the ballot drop boxes, then that will help the post office quite a bit. It's okay if you mail it really early, that's fine. But if you wait till the last minute, you might experience some pain. So you're better off using the drop boxes the later we get in the cycle. So 6 drop boxes, watch for us probably late next week to make our announcement about where all of this is going to occur. Let's move to in-person voting. For in-person voting, the governor and the Secretary of State agreed to do early voting, which is a very new concept for Kentucky. Normally we have in-person absentee, but it's heavily restricted. This time we're going to allow anyone to vote early starting on October the 13th. That's a Tuesday. In Fayette County, we're going to allow votes to occur between 8:30 and 4 p.m. daily, Monday to Friday, for the 3 weeks prior to the election. We will also add 3 Saturdays, 4 hours on each Saturday from 9 to 1 p.m. at the locations that I will provide in about a week or so. In addition to that, we will have early voting on the Monday before the election, again from 8:30 to 4 p.m. And then we will have a normal election day from 6 to 6, like always. I'm going to have somewhere between probably 6 or 7 physical locations for in-person voting. That will be consistent throughout the entire period from October the 13th through November 3rd inclusive. We've done some estimates. It depends on who you talk to, on what you think is going to happen, and no one knows. So let me share my pain with you guys and let you understand the complexity of making these decisions. So the first decision that's hard to make is how many people are going to turn out total. That decision, you'll be informed a little bit by knowing that in 2008, our highest turnout in a long time was 72% turnout. So I'm planning for, I don't think this is going to happen, but I'm planning for 85% turnout. That's the max number that I think will happen so that I can then ensure that the systems that I have in place will handle the load that's about to occur. The next decision you have to make is how many people do you think are going to vote in mail and how many do you think are going to vote in person? Well, you have to do the worst case numbers for each of those. So let's start with by mail. I think that the worst case by mail will be as high as 85%. Now in the primary, know that Lexington voted 95% by mail and 5% by in person. And that's because Lexington did the right thing and listened to me. I told them we can't do it. Our hands are tied. You must vote by mail. Please do that for me. And Lexington responded and did the right thing. This time, because of early voting and because of the extended period of early voting, I believe that Lexington will relax a little bit and actually vote in person. But worst case, I believe 85% of the volume of voting will come in the mail. So that means that I have to plan for the facility and the number of personnel to both send out mailed ballots as well as receive them back must accommodate something in the neighborhood of over 150,000 ballots. Let that soak in for a second and feel the pain with me. This has been an interesting year, to say the least. In terms of in-person voting, you have to flip it around and go the other way. I believe that the worst case for mail-in voting will be 70%, and the strongest or the largest turnout for in-person voting will be about 30%. For planning purposes, that's the worst case. So 30% of the numbers, when you run it all together, it turns out to be about 60,000 voters. Oh gosh. I'm sorry, our fire alarm has decided that its battery is dying. Okay, my son will take care of it in a second. So in-person voting, 60,000 voters. If you do the math over the 17 days, actually 20 days of voting, we can accommodate that, believe it or not, with only 4 locations, as long as everybody spreads out consistently over that time. Well, I'm not going to do 4 because we're having trouble finding locations, and I'll explain why in a minute. We need more than that for geographic purposes and so forth. So I want you to know that 4 is the minimum to accommodate the volume that will occur. And that's based on history, based on our knowledge of how things work at the local level, how much a precinct or a voting location can accommodate. You just pull the battery, bro. And then we had to decide, you know, minimum of 4, I guess is the way to look at it. So I believe that we will turn out a lot stronger in mail, and we won't go as hard in person as 30%, but just in case, that's what we're planning for. Instead, we're going to go with 7 locations. If I can consummate a negotiation that we were having literally today, I should have a total of 7. They're perfectly geographically spread around the edges of town, plus 1 in the middle. That should easily accommodate everybody in terms of the volume, and also be somewhat convenient enough for people to find a location that works for them. I want to remind everyone that you can vote from your kitchen table, is how I view this problem. And for the record, I advocated strongly for strict mail-in voting. Under the circumstances, that is by far the COVID safest way to do this. However, the political winds blow against me on this, so we're having to accommodate some in-person voting, which I don't support under the circumstances. Nevertheless, we're going to do it. But you're going to hear a lot of people argue about convenience. Your right to vote is consummate. There's no question about that. What you don't get to say is how you get to vote. When you get to vote from your kitchen table, it's my strong belief that that's sufficient for most people. There are a few exceptions. I totally get that, and we'll accommodate those. But otherwise, the general population should be focused on that method of voting. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to spread this disease and continue to have pain. We'd like to take a short side trip to the primary and remind everyone that the 2 weeks post the primary election, our positivity rate in Kentucky actually went down slightly. That's proof that what we did worked from a COVID point of view. And by the way, we had a fair and accurate election. Let's see. I think that pretty much covers generally how we're going to do this. You probably want to know when we're going to have results, so let's talk about that. The current emergency regulations put out by the State Board of Elections that mirror what the governor and the Secretary of State agreed to are that we are to publish partial results on election night. The way that looks is that we will publish the results of the votes that have been counted for early voting in person. We'll publish the results of whatever we've done in terms of mail-in processing up to that point, and we will publish the results of what happened on election day in person. All of that combined will be uploaded, what we call the ENR, which is the election night reporting. That's the Secretary of State's website that you all are used to looking at and watching the results roll in over time. It's kind of exciting. Well, that will happen again this election night, but bear in mind that not all the results will be in. In the primary election, I had something in the neighborhood of 20 to 25% of ballots returned on or after election day. There's no way we can count those that fast. So if it's that high again this time, be aware that the results posted on election night are likely very misleading. Certainly for the large statewide races, it may be indicative of the results, but for local and possibly state level races, you should be doubtful that it's over until the results are published the following Tuesday. The current e-regulation for this election says that we have to do our final certification on November the 10th, literally 1 week later, and that's what I believe most county clerks will do. You'll get your partial results on election night, you'll have silence, and then on the following Tuesday, we'll do the final push, and everyone will know the perfect results of the election. So I think I'll probably stop there. I know you all are wanting to do questions, Mary, at the very end. I have another Zoom to do, so I'm sorry I can't stay till then. Would you like to do questions now, or do you want me to just drop and let Josh and the rest go on and go ahead and talk?
Why don't we do a few questions, Don, if you don't mind. One question that came up that I saw was whether you still needed poll workers.
Oh, great question. Thank you. And guess what? This is the most shocking thing I'll say all night. No. We recruited enough people to do our in-person voting starting on October 13th that are willing to work the entire time through Election Day, which is nothing short of a miracle. And I'm so proud of our community for stepping up to do that.
Don, I have a quick question. Are the 6 to 7 in-person sites going to be county-wide vote centers such that anyone in the county can choose any of those vote centers to go if they want to vote in person?
Yes, great question. Thank you, Josh. I should have brought that up. Actually, the emergency regulation says that every county must have at least one voting center where anyone can vote from any precinct. I'm not sure why they wrote it that way, because the way the technology is going to work that we use statewide will allow any voting location to be a voting center. So I'm not sure. We even questioned them when they brought the regulation language before us. Why are you doing this? It's kind of redundant, and they did it anyway. So just know that, yes, every location will be a voting center. You don't have to worry about which one you go to. It's just fine to go to any of them.
Sounds good. Were there other questions that came in on the chat? Mo or Shayla have been looking at them.
Yes, one person asked, what website will you be updating for voter information, such as the Dropbox locations and updates? What's the website we should be looking for?
So I'm glad this question was asked, because I want to answer it in 2 steps. There are several groups out there that are do-gooder voter registration groups that are sending out mailings, mass mailings to the state, and it happened over the weekend. There are also some misinformation campaigns already appearing online. I would encourage everyone, do not pay any attention to anything that doesn't come from either your county clerk, the Secretary of State, or the State Board of Elections. If it comes from anywhere else, and I'm sorry, because I know the League of Women Voters likes to do advocacy, they need to ignore it. And we have to do it this way because already, I can't divulge exactly everything I know. I'll just say that there's a foreign power that you all know who I'm talking about is already trying to disrupt elections here in Kentucky. They're doing it in ways that are currently online, but they may resort to mail. We'll see. We're getting a lot of groups sending mails that are intended to be, helpful, but they're confusing people, thinking they're not registered to vote when they are, or that they need to take action when they don't. It's a very painful time for clerks, because we're getting thousands upon thousands of calls and they're completely unnecessary. So to the extent you all can, advocate for people to get the information from the correct source. In Fayette County, that correct source is my website, Fayette County Clerk, you spell it all out.com. We should have something up late next week. My County Board of Elections meets next Thursday, and assuming all of my in-person locations are worked out, we will vote and make our decision on the final plan, and then put that out to the public sometime late next week.
Great. Thanks, Don. So that's Fayette County Clerk spelled out.com. That's your
Correct.
official site. Good. Is there one or 2 more questions?
Yeah, how early will voters be able to access drop boxes for absentee ballots?
Good one.
Oh, thank you. I forgot to say that too. So the drop boxes are being built as we speak. There was a little snafu with the state board. I thought they were going to provide them for me, but they were running late, and I didn't want to take the chance. So I last minute ordered some for us that I actually like better than state boards. No offense to the state board. They will arrive mid to late September. I hope to have them installed by October the 1st.
Okay.
Sounds good. Anything else?
I see a question about videos regarding how to absentee ballot vote.
Right.
Multiple parties out there, including, I believe you guys are looking at doing something we'll do something in that vein. I don't know that I will do it. I may rely on third parties to help me with that, or possibly the government. We're a little busy running the election and don't have time to do a lot of this kind of stuff. I was going to say that the emergency regulation this time, and I know Dr. Douglas is going to like this, they completely, very much relaxed the rigidity of what we check on the ballot envelopes and so forth, so that a lot more ballots will be counted than normal. You may have seen in the paper after our primary election that, like, we rejected 7% in Fayette County, which is 6,000 or 7,000 ballots. That sounds like a lot, but that's actually a normal percentage. People forget to sign the outer envelope or forget to sign the inner envelope. It's not as complicated as you think, but it's complicated enough that people forget and make mistakes. Well, this time, they're going to be a lot more lenient with things like, if you sign the outer but not the inner, we're going to allow it. If you sign the inner but not the outer, we're going to allow it. If you forget to seal the inner envelope, we're going to allow it. There's a number of conditions that will be allowed that are not normally allowed under our state law. And I believe that will drop this percentage very significantly so that people will do a lot better in terms of getting their ballot counted.
Great. Don, there was a question about, is there a place where people can check to see if their ballot has been received?
Yeah, that's complicated for Fayette County, unfortunately, and for Jefferson County. Both those counties have their own voter registration systems and ballot tracking systems. That's a historical thing. For years, the state voter registration system was unreliable, and so both of the largest counties developed their own. That was sort of a backup system, if you want to think of it that way, and we've maintained them. We are not perfectly integrated with the state system, although we've been trying for several years. So what you will see in Fayette County and possibly Jefferson, I can't say that for sure, but for sure in Fayette County, we will track when your ballot is shipped, and we will upload that information to the system. It might be a one-day delay or something like that. In addition, when your ballot is received, we will also upload that to the state system, and it will either, in a day or so, it will be tracked, I hope, and shown by their system. What happened in the primary is their IT team got overwhelmed and they were unable to keep up with the volume. And so they didn't upload our data in a timely fashion. And in fact, didn't upload the final data until the Monday after Election Day, when people could see that their ballots were actually received. So we will do our best to track that, but it's going to be kind of difficult. I hope we can all do better on that one this time.
Don, do you have enough highlighters to highlight the two spots?
That's also a challenge. What Josh is referring to is that the current emergency regulation requires us to highlight the signature lines on both ballot envelopes. The answer to that is yes, for the most part. And the reason is, for new ballot envelopes, they're going to pre-print the highlight on them for us, which is the smart way to do it. By the way, I'd just like to point out, we've done this for years under normal circumstances because we have the time to do it. We had about 30 to 35,000 envelopes left over from the primary that we're going to reuse that are not highlighted. We've done some of those. I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but we will try, is the short answer.
Don, we thank you for being with us tonight, and we love the information, and we'll be looking at your website so we can check and see the latest information.
All right, thanks for your patience. I forgot to say this too, one last thing. The reason the in-person locations is so challenging in Fayette County, our civic center is under construction. That's an obvious central location for a massive vote center that I wish we could use. The football stadium, believe it or not, worked actually very well despite some of the voter issues that we had out there. I would love to use that, but no, we're doing SEC football. So my two go-to locations are already out of the picture. Finally, Fayette County Public Schools is not deciding when they're going to go back to in-person learning until September 28th. Way too late for me. So schools are out. I've had to drop back to my 5th or 6th level of choice of local government style or quasi-governmental buildings, and it's just not pretty. So I want you to know that in-person voting, despite having 6 or 7 locations and it feels okay, is just not pretty. And so I'm going to be pushing locally. I'm hitting my chest like this. I'm going to be pushing locally for everyone to vote by mail, whereas the rest of the state will probably be pushing in person to avoid massive amounts of mail. So I apologize in advance. I'm dealing with the hand I'm dealt. It's all I got. Thanks again, everybody. Love talking to you guys. Hi, Cindy. Talk to you guys later.
Thanks, Don,
All
so
right,
much.
great, Don.
Appreciate it. All right. Let's hear from Josh Douglas. He is the Ashland Incorporated Spears Distinguished Research Professor of Law at the University of Kentucky J. David Rosenberg College of Law. Professor Douglas's area of expertise is election law, voting rights, and constitutional law. He is the author of numerous articles, co-author of an election casebook, and author of the book, Vote for Us, How to Take Back Our Elections and Change the Future of Voting. Professor Douglas, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks to you and to the League of Women Voters. I always love spending time with this organization, which does such great work and which is so vital in helping the project of democracy flourish. I know Don hopped off, but I will say for posterity that we should all thank him as well. He's right that the job of a local county clerk is pretty thankless right now and pretty difficult. And, you know, we hear a lot about partisanship in the way in which our election laws run. But my research demonstrates that on the ground, the local election officials are generally speaking nonpartisan, even when they're elected in a partisan election, which I think is crazy. I don't think we should be having partisan elections for who runs our elections. No other modern democracy does that. But given the hand that we're dealt, as he put it, with respect to who runs our elections, our election officials do a really good job, by and large, of staying nonpartisan and really just focusing on the voter and focusing on how to try to make our election system as good as it can be. The other thing I'll say is that he's right. I'm very pleased with the election plan for this November. You know, Kentucky ranks typically number 42 or number 43 on a academic measure of how well we run our elections. There's a measure called the Election Performance Index. And depending on which year you look at in recent history, we're in the top, 42, 43, 44, which is not a place you want to be, right? I mean, I think if you want to be proud of the way you run your democracy, you want to be a lot higher than that, not at the very bottom. And the reason we're at the very bottom is because our voting laws are fairly restrictive. You know, we have a 29-day voter registration requirement. That if you aren't registered by 29 days before the election, you can't vote. And that's still the case this year, but that we know that voter registration deadlines like that depress turnout. That the states with shorter registration deadlines or even same-day voter registration have the highest turnout. We typically have very little early voting, very little absentee voting or mail-in voting because you need an excuse, and the list of excuses are pretty small. And we've relaxed that this year because we have kind of this three-pronged approach where anyone can choose to vote by mail. If you want to vote in person, you can during the early voting period, and then you have the election day voting. I'm pleased to hear what Don said about having 6 voting locations for in-person. That's a lot better than the one that we had in June. And so I think that plan sounds good. Of course, it remains to be seen where those locations are located. And also pleased to hear about the 6 drop boxes. I'd love more, but those things are very expensive. And the question, of course, is how do you do this with the money that you are given? But you all asked me to speak specifically about the new Photo ID Requirement, SB2, which I'm very familiar with because I was, as those who like the Hamilton musical might say, was in the room where it happened for a lot of the negotiations about how this law came to be and what's in it. And what I'll say is that although I oppose photo ID requirements as a general matter for academic reasons, for policy reasons, I think they're a solution in search of a problem. The only kind of fraud that they can prevent is in-person impersonation or just general voter impersonation. And we know for a fact That simply does not happen. Given all of that, I don't support photo ID laws, but I'll say that this law and the provisions that are in this law are actually not terrible, which is to say, I think this is one of the most mild forms of a photo ID law in the country, and that's because of a lot of the fail-safe mechanisms that were put into the bill, in addition to a couple of changes that the governor and secretary of state made specifically for this November election. So let me walk you through kind of what our law used to be and what it is now. So we've had a voter ID law in the past. In fact, since 1988, we've had a voter ID law. That is, voters had to show something when they showed up at the polls. It could be a utility bill, a social security card, a credit card, or even personal recognizance. If the poll worker knows you, then you don't have to show anything. And that's been our law for a good while. In the 2019 election, most people showed a photo ID. And I think the numbers are around over 95% of voters showed a photo ID, but you didn't have to. I actually, when I first moved here, started showing my credit card because I just thought it was kind of funny that that was a permissible thing for voting, and to the point where my poll workers started to get to know me as the annoying election law professor who always showed his credit card, and so they started checking me off as personal recognizance when I started to show up. But that's been our law for a while. SB2 changes that. SB2 is the name of the bill, the new photo ID requirement. And it changed it in a few meaningful ways. Now, voters will be asked to show a photo ID. So you can't just show a credit card or a social security card. And the poll worker can still use personal recognizance, but instead of just checking you off, checking the box saying personal recognizance, if you show up to vote in person, they'll have to fill out a form, basically saying, attesting, I know this person is who they say they are, and I know that they live in this community. So it'll take another minute or two if you're relying on that mechanism. But otherwise, you have to show a photo ID. Now, this can be any photo ID issued by the federal government, by Kentucky, or by a local government. It does not need to have an expiration date. It's a question I get a lot, but it does not matter if your ID is expired. It simply has to have your name and photo. It can be a university ID, and it can be a university ID from any university in the country. So although it's only US government or state or Kentucky local IDs that count, so you can't use a Tennessee driver's license, let's say, you could use a University of Tennessee student ID if that's what you had, as long as it has your name and photograph. And again, no expiration date required. So what happens if you show up to the polls and you don't have a photo ID and the poll workers don't know you? Because remember, again, showing up to the polls for in-person voting, you're going to be asked to show either a photo ID or the poll workers can check you off under personal recognizance and then fill out their own form. So if you show up to the polls and don't have either of those, you're going to be asked to show a non-photo ID, just what our old prior law was: a credit card, social security card, something with your name and address. Actually, it doesn't even have to have your address. Something with your name. There's a list of the permissible kinds of non-photo IDs. And if you show a non-photo ID, you'll be asked to fill out a one-page form. It's called the reasonable impediment form, or the voter affirmation form, in which you sign under penalty of perjury saying, here's why I don't have an ID, a photo ID. And there's a list of about 8 things that you can choose from, including lack the means to obtain the documents needed for an ID. So, lack the financial ability to obtain a birth certificate, medical reason for not being able to have a photo ID, a handful of reasons like that. And if you show your non-photo ID and fill out the form, you'll be allowed to cast a regular ballot. So this is different from other states, because in some other states, if you go through this process of filling out the form, you have to assign what's called a provisional ballot, a separate ballot that gets set aside, and then you might even have to go to the county clerk's office after election day to make sure that your vote will count. The Kentucky law says as long as you show a non-photo ID and fill out the form signed under penalty of perjury, you get to vote a regular ballot just like everybody else. So again, in terms of the photo ID requirement for in-person voting, it's pretty mild because lots of kinds of IDs count. Personal recognizance still counts if the poll worker knows you, but they'll have to fill out a form. And if you don't have a photo ID, you revert essentially back to our old law, where you still have to show something, but you have to fill out a form, and then you can vote your regular ballot. So then we get to mail-in voting or absentee voting, as Don said, Fayette County is going to encourage that as much as possible. I was concerned about what the law said and what the law will say after this election for absentee voters, because absentee voters under the law as passed, and don't get scared because this has been changed, but under the law as passed, absentee voters would have to provide a photocopy of their ID along with their ballot request or along with their ballot, or would have to fill out that reasonable impediment form and include it with their ballot. But that's pretty difficult, especially during a pandemic, if you have to go try to get a photocopy of your ID. So here's some good news. The State Board of Elections, as part of the regulation, said that anyone who uses the online portal to request a ballot essentially satisfies the new photo ID requirement. And here in one of two ways. Either when you request your ballot, you put in your driver's license information, and the driver's license database basically talks to the voter registration database. And so it's going to pull your information, and as long as you provide your driver's license information, you're good to go. You will request your ballot, and it'll come. I did it this past weekend. It took about a minute and a half, maybe less than that. If you don't have a driver's license, you'll be taken to a different page, which basically says that I'm signing electronically under penalty of perjury that I am who I say I am. So again, you don't have to do anything else. You can use the portal. You can satisfy the photo ID requirement. I'm hopeful that when we're not in a pandemic, the State Board of Elections will still say absentee voters, the portal counts, and so therefore you don't have to do anything additional. And I think that would be a very good move. There's no reason for it not to be the case if they're doing it for this year. I think that will work very well. So the initial version of the law, or the law is passed, which said you had to provide a photocopy of your photo ID, has been interpreted by the State Board to say using the portal and providing your driver's license information or filling out the voter affirmation as part of the portal counts for the photo ID law. So ultimately, I think this is, if we were going to have a photo ID law, I think this is pretty good news in terms of what it says, because again, if you are thinking about 3 ways of voting this November, if you're early in person or you're November 3rd voting, show your photo ID. If you don't have one, see if the poll worker knows you and can fill out personal recognizance and fill out the form, or show your non-photo ID like always as before, fill out the reasonable impediment form, you can vote a regular ballot. If you're going to vote by mail, which we're encouraging you to do in Fayette County, then use the online portal at govoteky.com to request your ballot. Put in your driver's license information as you're doing so. It'll automatically populate with your information and you've satisfied the law. If you don't have a photo ID, you can use essentially the online reasonable impediment form and you're good to go either way. So I think ultimately, given that we have a Republican legislature or a Republican Secretary of State who are intent on a new photo ID requirement, this is pretty much as good as one could expect. It's pretty darn good overall.
If you don't mind, Josh, I think we're going to ask a couple of questions of you, since we've got some pretty good timing right now. One of the things, someone asked if you thought, your opinion, if there's going to be a legal challenge to relaxing the rules for mail-in voting.
Sure. So there were 2 lawsuits that were brought before the governor and secretary of state issued their recommendations and rules for the November election, one in federal court and one in state court. And those have been dismissed. In fact, I think the league was a plaintiff in the federal case. Those have been dismissed because essentially that lawsuit asked for 2 things. It asked for expanded vote by mail for the November election and a delay of the photo ID requirement. Well, the state basically has done both. They've expanded vote by mail, although again, the language says excuse required. As Don said, everyone has an excuse. You just say you're concerned about COVID-19. And if you in the state and Secretary Adams has been very clear that the voter's subjective intent, or voter's subjective understanding of their own concerns about the coronavirus. And then the photo ID requirement, although they didn't delay it, they essentially eased it enough that it's not going to make a difference because, again, the online portal and putting in your driver's license information counts. So those lawsuits have been dismissed. So the question is, will someone on the other side sue and say, well, these are too relaxed? I don't expect to see a lawsuit because I'm not sure what the argument could be. We've made it easier to vote, and if the argument is, you're making it easier for voter fraud to occur, a court's going to say, where's your evidence? And there have been some lawsuits, but in other states about eased voting rules, but those are often about who has the authority to make those rules. Here in Kentucky, it's very, very clear. So long as there's a state of emergency declared, the governor and secretary of state jointly may issue emergency regulations to run the election. And that's exactly what they've done. So I really don't expect that we'll have a lawsuit to challenge these eased voting rules. And also, courts don't like last-minute challenges to the election rules. And so since the state has agreed to this and the state would be defending its changed rules, I think it's very unlikely that a court would say, actually, we just talked about a case in my election law class out of Rhode Island, where the state agreed to ease its rules. The Republican Party challenged. The state defended its changed rules, and one of the things the court said was, look, the state is defending the rules it wants to use, and the plaintiff, the Republican Party, it doesn't have any good arguments as to why this plan that the state has put out is negative. The one place where I could see a potential of litigation is once the counties announce their number of ballot drop boxes and locations and the number of voting sites and locations. I could see a lawsuit from one of the campaigns if one of the campaigns thinks that that's not broad enough, it's not in the right locations geographically. So stay tuned. I think the plan for Fayette of having 6 or 7 sounds good, depending on where they are geographically located. But that's the one thing that I'm watching for is one of the campaigns unhappy with the locations of either the drop boxes or the in-person voting sites, and might they try to mount the challenge for that.
Great. Mo or Shayla, do you have some other questions that people asked?
Yeah, we had one. It was to you, Dr. Douglas. Do you expect a party line split in mail-in voting? Because during the primary, Republicans burned their mail-in ballots in protest, leading to a lower turnout for their party.
Yeah, I think that's probably likely to happen again, that we'll see Democrats more using mail-in balloting, Republicans more in-person voting. We saw that in the primary here in Kentucky statewide, even though on the Republican side, it was about 60% of Republican votes in the Republican primary were by mail. It was something like 80% for Democrats. Rough numbers. Don't quote me on those exact numbers, but it was something like that. So still a majority of Republicans voted by mail, but the percentage of Democrats was a lot higher. I think we can expect that again because of the political rhetoric that's been occurring on vote by mail. And let me make 2 more quick points on that topic. One, do not vote by mail and then show up in person. The president who encouraged this is encouraging you to commit a felony. It will be caught. The system is set up to track your ballot. So if you try to show up in person, they will see that you've requested an absentee ballot. It'll get referred to a prosecutor. It's going to make the lives very difficult for people like Don Blevins. So it is just a terrible idea all around, and you're not going to prove anything because, again, the system is literally set up to flag those sorts of things. The second thing I wanted to comment on is what Don said with respect to election night results, which is the academic literature has demonstrated what is referred to as the blue shift, or here in Kentucky we might call it the big blue shift, which is that the totals announced on election night and the actual official totals a week or so later often demonstrate Democratic candidates doing better. That is, there's a blue shift in the vote totals between the unofficial election night results and the actual official certified results. We saw this in 2018, for example, in Arizona, where the Senate candidate looked like the Republican won the U.S. Senate race on election night, but after all the ballots were actually counted and throughout the week, the Democratic candidate won. And in fact, we saw that in a lot of the congressional races in California, for example, where the Democrats actually had a very big win, a big wave in the midterm elections, which was not seen on election night because not all the ballots were counted. Election night results are never official. Especially for things like the presidency, they're always media projections. The election isn't actually over and official for a week or several weeks after the election. Every vote will count. It's another myth I hear. People say, well, I heard that absentee ballots don't count unless they make a difference in the result. That's never been the case. Every absentee ballot has always been counted, just sometimes not until after the election day, and then they're included in the certified results. So don't be surprised if the vote total shift towards the Democrats. That's actually the system working in terms of counting every ballot.
Great. Thanks so much. Anything else?
I wanted to add that if someone requests an absentee ballot and within 7 days haven't mailed it, if they want to make sure that their vote is counted and they want to vote in person, they have to cancel the absentee ballot before going in person. I had several person asking me like last time, because we always procrastinate, there's so much to do, and then they just got afraid. So you can switch, you just have to tell them ahead of time.
That's right. And so if you request your ballot and it's not received by October 28th, then you can go to early voting or November 3rd voting and say that, and you'll have to fill out a form canceling your ballot. If it's before October 28th, there'll be additional forms essentially you have to fill out. So it's not a good idea particularly not a good idea to request your ballot and then try to go vote early before October 28th. But the regulation explicitly says that if it hasn't showed up by October 28th, then you have those additional dates, 5 days or so for in-person voting. You can go and cancel your absentee ballot request. And that's actually relatively easy if you're after that time period.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. or Professor Douglas. We appreciate all of your information very much. Thank you for being with us.
Well,
all right. Let's go ahead for our last speaker. Selene Gomez has an MPA and is the National Outreach Director for VoteRiders. VoteRiders is a national nonprofit that helps people obtain their voter IDs. We are excited to hear more about VoteRiders and their services.
Once again, my name is Selene Gomez. Thank you all for having me here today. As I'll speed a little bit through the first slides here. But yes, we are a national nonpartisan organization. We started in 2012, and we are in the, you can, no, it's okay. You can fast forward to where there's a map if you'd like. And so we've been around since 2012. We are currently in 35 out of the 50 states because 35 of the states have voter ID laws. And so for us, we focus on voter education and also just providing practical solutions to problems that voters may face that would, serve as obstacles to not, not allow them to get the state ID, which essentially is something that is accepted across the board in all of the states. So if you can go to the next slide, please. And we know that right now there are 25 million voting age Americans, so people that are eligible to vote that do not currently have a government issued ID. And this can affect, as we can see in this next slide, you're gonna see a map of the states that have voter ID laws. So the ones that are in light blue, which is Kentucky now, are the ones that have what we consider non-strict voter ID laws. What does that mean? That means that yes, you need a photo identification. However, there are alternative ways to be able to cast a regular ballot, such as Dr. Douglas had explained, signing the reasonable declaration of impediment and being able to show a secondary document. And those are the ones in light blue. However, the ones in red, those are a little bit more strict. For example, in Arizona, if you do not provide your driver's license number when you register, that's fine, but you have to provide it the first time you go vote. If you don't do that, you are allowed to vote for federal elections, but not local elections because you have not established your local residency. And unfortunately, we still see that. I just spoke to a partner about a week ago, and she said that she was not able to vote in those elections because it's taken her about a year to be able to get her Arizona ID. Which kind of speaks to how difficult is it to get your ID, not only on a regular basis, but right now during a pandemic. We can go to the next slide. And of course, there are certain populations that are affected by this more than others, communities of color, and also low-income communities. Another population is either young voters that tend to be pretty mobile, like college students, or older voters that maybe the reason they have a driver's license is because they want to drive. They decide they're not going to drive anymore, and it may expire. There are some special provisions in some voter ID law states where it does allow people, voters that are older, to be able to use expired IDs and such. But then we also see that women tend to be more affected by this because of the fact that if you get married or whatnot, you may change your name and it may not reflect that in the voter ID or in the voter ID with your voter registration if you do not update it. Next slide. So because we see all of these obstacles, we developed some tools and services to help nonprofits or any organization really, but we do everything completely free of charge for 501c3s, which the League has been a very good partner with us nationally and also in different states and different chapters. And what we do is essentially we partner with organizations to help identify voters that need assistance in getting their ID. And we have the mechanism in the back end to do the one-on-one assistance so we can make sure that they get their identification. So if, you know, we're in hurricane season, right? Unfortunately, people are displaced. They may lose important documentation. If they need assistance in getting a copy of their certified copy of their certificate or anything like that, we actually help them. One, if they need to help navigating through the process, and two, if they also need assistance in covering the cost, we help with that. Sometimes it's as simple as, hey, I live in a rural area and I don't have transportation to the DMV. Then we provide that. Or maybe they do have a car, but they don't have gas money. We make sure that we equip them or we give them that monetary assistance. And then there are some cases that we've had in the past where it have taken months to be able to either amend, you know, a name in a birth certificate, things like that. So we actually do have quite a bit of lawyers that are willing to take pro bono cases and take on some legal matters in some of the cases here. Next slide. So the first tool that we have here is our voter ID information cards. These are wallet-sized cards. We do have these in English and in Spanish, and if you see, they do reflect the new law because it does talk about the reasonable impediment declaration. And for, again, 501c3s, we print these and ship them to you completely free of charge. There is no limit as to how many you can order, and there is no limit as to how many times you can order these. The smallest order we've had this year has been 250 cards. The largest one that we've had has been 293,000 cards. So there really isn't, you know, a limit on that. And this is, for us, we use this because people can literally put it in their wallet and take it out when they're about to go vote. And we've seen that they have drastically improved the voter turnout. We did have, you know, kind of a, I guess, an experiment in a county in Houston, Texas. And we saw that there was an increase of about 200% after implementing these cards. So we really see that people are equipped with the confidence and the tools to be able to go and vote. And these are especially important because when we're doing voter registration, oftentimes it's either first-time voters or voters who have unfortunately been disenfranchised for one reason or another. And so we know that that first experience needs to be a positive one in order for them to come back and vote. And we've definitely seen that this has been a helpful tool. Now, on the bottom, it also has our helpline, which people can either call us or text us to this number. They can email us. And then in the other side, it doesn't have it here, but we're actually also implementing a QR code that you can scan. So you can also get information on mail-in ballots. This is very important because there's 13 states and Kentucky is one of them, where if you do request a mail-in ballot, you do have to provide the hard copy of your identification. We actually have a program that we developed because of this that I'll talk about a little bit later. But note that also these cards are also on our website. We have them for all 50 states plus DC, and they are digital friendly. So a lot of our partners, because instead they're not doing canvassing anymore, they're switching to phone banking or text banking, they're actually sending this card, the link to it, in their text banks. So when the voter gets it, you click on the link, it comes up as a picture and they can save it on their phone. Next slide, please. We also have our voter ID chatbot. So you can either start the, you know, I guess the conversation through our helpline, through Facebook Messenger, and also on our website, it is embedded there. We do have a couple of partners who have incorporated it into their website as well. It does have the 2 prompt questions where you do have to provide a specific answer. The first question is, do you prefer English or Spanish? You provide the answer, and then it asks what state you're contacting them from, so we know which list to send you. But after that, it's pretty cool because you don't have to know what prompt to send, because you're actually going to be chatting with a live trained volunteer or staff member. So whatever the question is, it doesn't matter how you word it, or if you just know that you need assistance in getting your ID, you can just ask right away and we would connect you with someone to be able to give you that assistance. Next slide. So we did have our direct voter, our DVC partnerships previous to this one. Just a note on that one, if you do have a phone bank or an extensive program where you are contacting voters, oftentimes we ask partners if they're willing to add do you have a voter ID? And the simplest thing is, do you have a current state driver's license or identification? And if they don't, they send us a list of those voters, and we actually have trained volunteers who will follow up with them. And this one is our Photocopy My ID program, which is the one I briefly spoke about. So essentially, you contact us through our helpline. You can either call us, text us, or via email or our chatbot. And if you need hard copies of your identification, because we're in a pandemic, there isn't necessarily full access to this, you send us a picture of your identification. We do have a law firm who is doing this pro bono. They vet the identification to make sure that it's an acceptable ID in the state that you're contacting us from. Once they have that, they print out 2 hard copies. Once those 2 hard copies are printed, we immediately delete, the identification, the picture of the identification, and then we mail that back. And it also includes an absentee ballot application form that we will print out for the person, and with a stamped envelope addressed to the office that needs to process it. So then the person doesn't have to worry about going to the post office to get the stamp. They don't have to worry about trying to Google where it is that they have to send their application. They are going to get that information in the mail from us. Of course, the downside to this is we're using regular mail, so we can't say, hey, we're going to do this and we guarantee that you'll have it in 5 days or in a week, because it just depends, on the mail. But this would be something very helpful to voters, especially in Kentucky. If they're not that it's required, but if they do need that, we can definitely help with that. So we also provide trainings, so specifically on voter ID laws, again, in any of the 35 out of the 50 states. We also have annual trainings, which we would be more than happy to invite you all to be a part of, to kind of get also a sense of what is it looking like in other states as well. Sometimes it's helpful because there are some different tactics used in different places. And so these trainings, usually we do them in person, but of course, due to COVID, we are doing them all virtually. Next slide. So again, I just want to emphasize that is our voter ID helpline, the 844-338-8743, which you can call us or text us. With any questions that you have, we also have virtual presentations such as this, talking about what tools we can use. And then also we have voter ID clinics. Some of these have been successful in some of the states we're in, like in Florida, where if you identify a group, it used to be 40 to 50 people, but now we are scaling down 10 to 20 because of the social distancing. Oftentimes DMVs have mobile units, and if we find a community center, the DMV will actually come to us into our clinics, and we will help the individual right then and there to be able to get their ID. This is of course very helpful because you don't have to spend the whole day in the DMV to be able to update or to get your identification. But we do have some tools if you want to read up a little bit on that on our website, which by the way, has been just launched this past week with our new and improved website. So please feel free to go and kind of play with it and see the different resources that we have there. Next slide. And this is our contact information. Please feel free to reach out. I know that this law, although relaxed and there has been some modifications, which is great, we do understand that, this is going to be the new law, the new norm. And so if there are people, of course, we help them to get their identification. for voting purposes, but we know that it's also a holistic approach because people just need identification, whether it's maybe during the pandemic to qualify for certain benefits or assistance. So please don't hesitate to contact us. If you have an idea on how we can actually spread the word or something that would be helpful in your county, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much. Do we have some questions for Ms. Gomez? Looks as though you explained things very well. Thank you so much. All right, I want to thank our three wonderful speakers, Mr. Don Blevins, Professor Josh Douglas, and Ms. Selena Gomez, and to all of you for attending tonight. Please remember to register to vote or update your voter registration by October 5th, 4 p.m. by going to vote411.org, or you can go to govotekentucky.com. Vote411.org is the League's one-stop shop for voting information. In addition to registering, you can also find our nonpartisan voter guide to learn about the candidates in the upcoming election, and also specific information about polling places when it becomes available. The League's next community forum will be October 13th, 2020 at 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. when we will present Dot Ridings, former state and national president of the League of Women Voters, who will speak of several important issues that occurred during her tenures. Joining her will be Marcia Weinstein, president of the National Women's Collaborative for Women's History Sites. She will be speaking about Kentucky suffragists. Check our website, lwvlexington.com, to register for this program later in September. Thank you, everybody.